Stephen Jessie Bernstein was well known in Seattle art circles as a poet, novelist, and painter. Last year, Bernstein began to set some of his poetry to music. The result was an album called Prison. It was released this spring, 5 months after Bernstein, age 40, killed himself. Ann Martin of member station KPOU reports.
Jessie Bernstein's poetry, like his life, does not have soft edges.
There has always been something wrong with my face. Look in the mirror, Stevie, my mother said, holding me up so I could see my face. See? There's Stevie. The little ears stuck out. That was the first thing I noticed. The 2 ears.
Bernstein saw himself as an ugly man, and rather than try to downplay his looks, he emphasized them. Susie Schneider, a Seattle performance artist, remembers the first time she met him in a cabaret where she was doing a show.
Both arms up to the elbow were covered with homemade blue tattoos. The knuckles on one hand read live and the other read dead. He was smoking about a 1/4 inch of a Camel unfiltered cigarette, and he kind of smelled.
Yet there was something about Bernstein that drew people to him. Schneider and others who knew him described Bernstein as intense, committed to his work, and very supportive of their efforts. Do your job was a refrain Bernstein often used when talking with fellow artists.
It wasn't a cynical thing. It was be as honest as you can. Do your job, he used to tell me, do your job when I was hanging backstage and fearful of going on and performing what was in my heart.
But it wasn't just Bernstein's encouragement that made people like him. It was the way he talked. He spoke in poetry. Regina Hackett, art critic for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer and a friend of Bernstein's, describes him as the John Coltrane of conversation.
There was this guy just spinning out golden riffs. They could be quite agonized, too, searching, full of spirit, but funny, too. Funny and tender.
It's midnight and the sunglasses twirl. My injury's a deaf plant warped in a Hollywood rockery of juice cans and hypodermic needles. It's so cool, baby, you don't know what you need. If the jaundice comes up, get out of the traffic.
Jessie Bernstein was born in Los Angeles. According to several of his friends, he may have been abused as a child. Allison Slow-Loris, who was married to Bernstein for 5 years in the early 80s, says by the time he was an adolescent, he was on his own.
He went to San Francisco. He became a junkie immediately, a whore to support the habit, and a jazz bass player. At the age of 14, 15, he was playing with the house band in a strip joint.
Bernstein eventually drifted to Seattle. Those who knew him at that time say they thought of him as a visual artist and a musician. One of the first people he met here was bass player Pete Lanonen. The two collaborated on a number of songs over the years, Lanonen writing the music and Bernstein writing and sometimes singing the lyrics.
One lonely and frozen night, all the stars shined in the sky. I was blind and could not see their light. I was dumb and could not cry.
It was also in Seattle that Jessie Bernstein began to write seriously. He published a novel and some of his poems. 2 years ago, Bernstein was contacted by the independent record label Sub Pop. The producers wanted to record him performing some of his songs in a Washington state prison. The concept didn't work, but Sub Pop kept Prison as the title of the Jessie Bernstein album. It actually sums up in one word Bernstein's life in his body. As a child, he had polio and spent a year in an iron lung. As a 12-year-old, his widow Leslie Freed says, he was committed to a California mental facility.
During that experience, he was brutalized over and over and over. And he was raped. He was beaten.
As an adult, Freed says, Bernstein had to be hospitalized many times for a painful brain disorder.
Sometimes his hands would become very kind of paralytic, very stiff, and they would hurt. Later on, he had a vision problem. It would feel like he just wanted to rip out the inside of his head. I mean, he just couldn't get away from it.
Writing was the one constant in his life. And his struggle with life fueled his writing.
The black rubber tires of 4 a.m. pulling their their heavy truck over my skull and bones. I remember the bottle as I lay awake, but I'm too scared to touch it. A green cloud hovers in the air above the bed, kiss the radio and smoke, wondering where all the sweat comes from. Ate 2 cans of soup, one after the other, and feel healthy. Now the crumbling artifice of the black sky cracks into orange lines. The traffic is a conveyor belt of brown candy bars. I put my mouth to the road and suck. Can you cry? I cannot cry. I do not cry.
The Music in Prison is the work of keyboard player and alternative rock producer Steve Fisk. He says Bernstein was clear about what he wanted his poetry and Fisk's music to accomplish.
Jessie very specifically didn't want to make an arty, serious, cold, austere spoken word record. He was very specifically wanted to have dynamics and texture and a real diversity on the record and didn't want to come off as this, chainsaw mad poet screaming into a microphone.
The making of the album came at a time when Jessie Bernstein was losing the battle with his mental problems and with alcoholism. Bernstein committed suicide last October after finishing the recording of his poetry. Friend and critic Regina Hackett says, true to his motto, he had done his job.
He had an incredible illness, which he valiantly fought. And he was not great because he was sick. He was great in spite of it.
Jessie Bernstein's Sub Pop CD, Prison, is the only nationally available recording of Bernstein's poetry. Only one of his books is still in print. His family and friends say volumes of his work, poems, a novel, and songs have yet to be published or recorded. The Bernstein estate does plan to issue a small volume of his poetry this winter. For National Public Radio, I'm Ann Martin in Seattle.
Looking up at a dying street light, I shut out the traffic with a personal noise in my ears.
This is NPR's Morning Edition. I'm Bob Bedford.